right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I haven't seen anybody roll in just a minute. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Byron Gary. I am a senior attorney with the Kentucky Resources Council. Um, this is our kickoff of our summer KELI series. For those new to KELI, KELI is the Kentucky Environmental Leadership Institute. It's a program that seeks to inspire and inform the many Kentuckians ready to make positive environmental change. Each year, we provide free community workshops to give Kentuckians the tools to better protect the places they live and love. I'm here today with Tony Curtis. He is the executive director of the Metropolitan Housing Coalition. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things, housekeeping, not housing, before we get going. The webinar is being recorded, just so everybody's aware today. We'll share out a copy of that after we get through today. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. Feel free to go ahead and drop Q&As or Qs or A's if you've got them in the chat as we go along, and we'll get to them at the end with help from Ashley. And with that, we'll get started. So as I said, I'm here with Tony Curtis, Executive Director of the Metropolitan Housing Coalition. Tony, why don't you start off by telling us a little about yourself?
Well, I'm originally from Eastern Kentucky. I grew up in Ashland, but have lived for the last 13 years here in Louisville, but basically been up and down the I-64 corridor ever since leaving Ashland. Some time in Moorhead, time in Huntington, Frankfort, and now Louisville. I'm a historian by training, worked in state government for a little over a decade at the State Historical Society in a variety of research positions there before coming to the Metropolitan Housing Coalition in 2018. So 8 years here. My predecessor, Kathy Hinko, who I see is online as well, hired me as the development director in communications. And then 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, I became executive director of MHC. But just as a little side note, when I was in undergrad and grad schools, going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, I was involved in various advocacy efforts, one of which was anti-mountaintop removal valley fill work in conjunction with KRC, KRC, Kentucky Resources Council. I should say who I'm talking about. The then Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition with Vivian Stockman and others, SEIU 1199 in Huntington, West Virginia. So worked a lot of that advocacy, and that was my first introduction to the Kentucky Resources Council. So however many, almost 30 years ago. Yeah. Geez. That was quite a while now.
Aging ourselves.
I know, right? No more talk of that.
Hopefully everybody here knows who KRC refers to.
I know.
All right, so where did you go to undergrad and grad, by the way?
So I went to Moorhead State University to do my undergrad in history with a minor in government. And then I went to Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, and did a master's degree in labor, race, gender, history, kind of late 1930s, 20th century history.
Yeah. Not to date you too much more. When did you graduate Moorhead? I didn't know you went to Moorhead.
2002.
Okay. You didn't know my parents, who both went to Moorhead. So I'm trying to undo some of that dating. So
there we go. There we go. Thank
you. Yeah. So as we said, you're the director of the Metropolitan Housing Coalition. And just so we have acronyms straight, I might say MHC. That's Tony's organization here.
Yeah.
So your focus obviously is housing. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that MHC does?
Yeah, most definitely. And we definitely live in an acronym world, that's for sure. I remember coming to MHC and we had a list of like 5 pages of acronyms of housing stuff. So we'll try to get out of acronym world.
We'll get to the energy world in a little bit.
I know, right? Yeah, so the Metropolitan Housing Coalition was founded in 1989, doing research-based advocacy for fair, accessible, and affordable housing in our community. Our main focus is Louisville, Jefferson County, work in the surrounding metropolitan statistical area as well, and to a certain extent at the state and national level on advocacy and legislative issues. We host and convene community conversations. MHC is not at the table. We're convening the conversation around housing. One of the things we're most known for is the State of Metropolitan Housing Report that we've published in partnership for many years with the University of Louisville. We now work with Northern Kentucky University to produce in December of every year and have done so since 2003. That has tracked and given us good baseline data on housing for 23 years now. That report also creates a foundation of a focus topic. So it may be zoning a couple years ago, it was climate change a few years before that, aging in place, name the topic. We've probably covered it in a certain respect. But it not only gives us that good baseline data, it helps drive the community conversation on a focus topic, which really sets the conversation. It creates policy recommendations and kind of drives kind of a 30,000-foot level conversation on housing in our community, and helps other nonprofits, other community organizations use that data to bring in additional grant funding to fund their organizations, to help expand and complicate the conversation a little bit. And what I'm interested in, which a lot of our work with KRC is that integration, that intersectionality of housing, sustainability, energy efficiency, and the environment.
Yeah. The one thing you left out is your annual gala, which is one of the things I look forward to every June.
Indeed. I guess, yeah. So every June we have our annual meeting dinner. We bring in a national speaker. This year was Brian Goldstone, who recently won the Pulitzer Prize for his book on working in homelessness in America, focusing on families in Atlanta, Georgia. So he won the Pulitzer a week before he came here, which was pretty cool. But I always see it as a big reunion of the affordable housing community. Ties are renewed, relationships, businesses renewed, people who haven't seen each other all year come together, and it's that big reunion kind of feeling to it. Everybody gets to see each other. It's our big fundraiser for the year, but also just what we do. We're a coalition, so we bring all that community back together.
Yeah, this year I got to sit at a table with a bunch of folks from HUD, which was interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The year before, I think I sat next to Shamika Parish Wright and some of the folks from Vocal, so it's always a great time.
Yeah.
And not to mention the food is always delicious.
Yeah,
Mayan Cafe.
Mayan Cafe this year.
Yeah,
Last year.
and last year.
Yeah.
So that's always a good time. And Brian's talk was really fascinating this year. It was not just about like homelessness, but it was about the working poor. So folks who work typically minimum wage jobs often find themselves either in like short-term housing, those like weekly hotel rentals and stuff like that, and just one thing after another, or one thing, starts a whole chain of events and they can't find their way out.
Everybody's one medical bill, a car, a mechanic's payment for a car repair. I mean, this is all interconnected, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we really like to focus on. And he was really good at bringing that conversation together. Although he's talking about Atlanta, many of the themes and topics still apply. We have those same issues here in Louisville as well.
Yeah, he did a great job of telling it through the stories of some certain individuals, but I'm sure we could find those same folks here in Louisville.
Agreed.
You also mentioned the policy work that you do. Some folks may have seen Tony, if you were watching the legislative session closely this year, specifically testifying on SB 8s with our own Audrey Ernstberger, our policy expert. Tell us a little about that and maybe some of the other legislative things that you're looking at or have been seeing lately.
Yeah, and MHC historically has really been focused on Metro Council, local issues. We work in coalition with other folks like George Eklund at the Coalition for the Homeless, Audrey Ernstberger at KRC, Fitz in the past as well. Also, Adrian Bush at the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky. And we really have expanded that network across the state on state legislative issues. So I think a big part of our focus has been in the last few years trying to get momentum. We've seen more on housing bills, right? We've seen more housing bills being produced and actually discussed, at least filed. Some of them don't ever actually make it to committee, but it starts the conversation. If we know anything about advocacy is about the long term. We're not going to we'll see some short-term gains, but it takes a long time. For example, they had the housing task force over the last two interims to really educate the legislature on housing issues, which kind of the first year of it. This past year, they really focused on legislative efforts and what they would be able to propose and what topics they could actually make some gains on. An issue that we've been talking about for quite a long time is affordability, right? Housing affordability, utility affordability are linked together. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. So thinking about some major legislative issues that we've been pushing for several years, which is shutoffs and disconnections, right? We know that people are safe and healthy when they are housed. We know that people can only do that when they have access to utilities and affordable utilities at that. Your housing is not affordable unless your utilities are affordable. So we've been pushing, with a coalition of other folks, shut off and disconnection protections. That needs to be available to all 120 counties and the utilities serving those counties. We see that as, a recent settlement. I think was it Eastern Kentucky Power Company or Kentucky Power Company. Couldn't remember off the top of my head. Where parts of 17 counties in Eastern Kentucky, part of the settlement was about disconnection protections. So we can offer that to parts of 17 counties. We should offer it to 120 counties. There's also kind of a de facto thing and kind of the cooperatives where they say, hey, we don't disconnect people. Some of the large utilities say the same thing, but it's not a policy driven thing that is uniform. Mm-hmm. And we need uniformity across all 120 counties. That legislation's had up and downs. We've had bipartisan support of it over the years. So hopefully in the next year or so, we can continue to push that and get that through a committee of the legislature. Eviction expungement is another big thing. It made it the furthest it had ever made this year, but got killed at the last minute because it got combined into Senate Bill 9, which was kind of this big housing bill. And short-term rentals were a part of that, which eventually killed that piece of legislation. But eviction expungement made it through the House and into the Senate, and we thought it was going to pass.
Yeah.
But it was focused on, children, juveniles, right? Should not have an eviction on their record when they become adults. Yeah. It also focused on filings versus judgments. If you have an eviction filing on your record, that follows you just as much as a judgment does as well.
And it makes a big deal. I remember part of Brian's talk this year at your gala was about a woman who was a victim of domestic violence. She had separated from a partner who then stalked her, ended up burning her rental home down. Mm-hmm. She departed for other housing, had trouble finding anywhere. And then finally, when she did find somewhere, she found out that the owner of that rental that had burned down had evicted her formally after it burned down. And that prevented her from getting new housing too.
Mm-hmm. And so there's been some talks about that, about domestic violence and being let out of leases and different things like that. The other thing is revolving loan funds. As far as we know, there is a housing crisis in Louisville. We need about 50,000 units for the lowest incomes in our community. We also, at the state level, need over 200,000 units across 120 counties. So it's well documented. There is a housing crisis. We need housing. The disagreement is about how do we get there, what do we build, and where we're allowed to build it, right? So we need revolving loan funds that fund this and can create housing in the amounts and the mass of housing that we need to create. We need to do it systematically. We need to have a zoning landscape that accepts all different types of housing. If we're building denser housing, we can build on smaller parcels of land, hopefully with less environmental impact as well. So thinking about that perspective is important as well across the state.
Yeah, and you and I were just talking about zoning specifically a few minutes ago before we started. And I understand the Louisville Land Development Code reform process has just started back up. I remember hearing about that back when I was working for the Air Pollution Control District, and they were talking about how environmental justice might be worked in, but that's something to be watching out for now too.
It is. I think it's a constant state of land development code reform ever since I've been here. It's funny going through a drawer not too long ago, pulled out one of the local NPR, Louisville Public Media policy shows from 2005. And my predecessor, Kathy Hinko, was talking about land development code reform, right? Mm-hmm. Here we are 20 plus years later, and we're having some of the same conversations. But we made it, looking back to the Plan 2040, the comprehensive plan that tells you what you can build, where you can build it, it kind of gives that vision for that 20-year built environment, drove and included affordable and fair housing for the first time ever. That was a huge step. Now we're talking about land development code where we put it into the regulatory environment, right? What you could build, where you could build it, and ultimately where people can and cannot live. And so for decades now, we've been working on this. The first iteration, we got through accessory dwelling units, granny flats was a big thing that came out of that. Community market gardens as well was a big part of that. Several other things. We were just getting to middle housing, so talking about duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, pocket neighborhoods, different types of more dense building possibilities was starting to happen. That kind of got killed. They're going to revamp that here in kind of legislation this year to hopefully get that within the urban services districts is going to be the conversation. But a renewed effort through a HUD grant they received called a pro housing grant. Part of that funding is going to go towards this renewed effort on land development code, which is really pushing Louisville to think about our zoning and our land development code as kind of a form-based code.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big thing. Lots of public conversations going to be had. If you look at the RFP, it kind of outlines what they want to do.
Yeah.
So yet again, zoning will be a part of our life.
And not just in that way, but we'll return to zoning a little bit later toward the end of our conversation.
Yep.
But I wanted to turn to a little bit about what you were talking about regarding housing, not just being the roof over your head, but like having the power, the water, the utilities that you need to have a safe and livable environment. That's sort of the overlap where MHC and KRC came together some time ago, I guess before either of us started with our respective organizations. But we were trying to talk a little bit about the history, and maybe Kathy can hop on during the Q&A and fill in any gaps we leave. But I think that both organizations had been doing work specifically with LG&E and KU and before the Public Service Commission. You want to tell us a little bit about what you know about the history there?
Yeah, and Fitz would be able to give some of that background too, because there was a lot of work done with AARP early on, the area community ministries as well on affordability issues. MHC was brought into the conversation to help push that conversation forward. We've been involved ever since then. I came in when Kathy hired me in 2018. We were in the midst of a rate case that was 2020.
The 2020 rate case, I think, would be the first one where Fitz represented the joint interveners.
Yeah, as a collective, right? And so we had various groups who were involved in this, and so that concept of the joint interveners really consolidated, I think, that vision, the narrative we were creative, and the base of and the foundation of kind of the data that we want to do as well. And kind of, it's a great thing because we have strong partnerships, not only in Louisville, but across the state that we can rely on in these conversations. And it really is a statewide conversation because we can pull from rate cases filed in multiple areas that, ideas, expert witnesses, but that's been key for MHC. And MHC has been involved on the energy side with KRC for many years. We got more involved on the water side since the pandemic. And I think an outgrowth of the pandemic was that people realized rental assistance dollars were going to particular areas of Louisville. Utility assistance dollars were going to those same areas. So we knew they were connected. I think the public is even more aware of now of that connection of the affordability question of both of those.
Yeah, and sort of tying in demographics, as you were just alluding to, Sarah just had a webinar last week, I think, on how to use census data to sort of link the two.
That is critical, right? Funding in many respects across the board, thinking federally, is determined by census tracts. A lot of times we're only able to access zip code level data. Okay, that's great. But if we really want to drive home policy and understand that landscape of affordability, looking at issues of poverty, issues of what types of housing that are being built, household creation and household tenure, a lot of different things like that, we really need to understand the census tract because that's driving funding. And we know that funding aspect across the board is driven by that data organized in that way. And so we've been pushing for that for years as part of joint interveners and MHC's work with KRC to try to develop that narrative and push the information when we're doing data requests to get information back organized by census tract. We're still working on that.
We certainly are. And we have access to some of that, of course, through the census, but then trying to get info on utility bills is like pulling teeth to get any farther than the zip code level. I feel
Yeah,
like.
and when a lot of, especially during the pandemic, eviction work was really kicking off towards the beginning of the pandemic, and that became a big issue as well. You have Eviction Lab, which was doing census tract level data as well. Like all
Mhm.
this data was coming together, but
Yeah.
let's focus on utility, get the utility
Well, I
data.
remember during the IRP, we requested like overdue bill data by whatever most refined
Hmm.
level that utilities had it. And Sarah actually spent your colleague. We'll talk about Sarah's role in
Yeah.
just a minute, but Sarah was pulling through the data and noticed there were a few zip codes that had just huge overdue bills consistently. And we determined it's easy enough to determine the cause and how to fix it when a zip code has only one ratepayer, like a large industrial ratepayer that we found was
Yep.
causing those issues. But when you've got zip codes that cover, dozen or more
Hmm.
census tracts, let alone census blocks at a lower level, it's a
Yeah.
lot harder to sort of target
Right.
and sort of target energy efficiency and things like that,
Because
right?
there's going to be income diversity across some of those zip codes, right? And so we need to be able to understand in a more microcosm kind of what those households are
Yeah.
made up of in those zip codes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, All right. So also reminds me, I don't know if you've ever heard Fitz's story about how the joint interveners started up, but if you get a chance to ask him about AARP,
Okay.
sometimes he tells it much better, but basically they called him up to work for them before the PSC, and his first bone to pick was they already considered him a retired person at that point and soliciting donations. So,
I'm
which is it? Do you want me to work for you, or do you want me to be a
That
member?
is great. I'm sure he tells a great
Yeah,
story. He always
yeah.
does.
Um, okay, so turning back to the importance of utilities, I think one of the more obscure agencies at the state level or anywhere tends to be, many states refer to it as a PUC or something like that, but the Public Utility Corporation, or here in Kentucky, the Public Service Commission.
Hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the PSC and specifically, aside from just working with LG&E and KU, why you ended up going to the PSC.
Yeah. So the Public Service Commission plays a huge role in determining rates. MHC's focus has always been low to median and low to middle income households,
Hmm.
particularly the lowest income households in our community. Being able to discuss and kind of complicate, as I was saying, the conversation of not only being a utilities conversation, it's a housing conversation as well. That we need to be, and our board has recognized this for years, former executive directors, our current board and me as executive director, that conversation needs to be continued to be driven. The creation and the analysis of when a utility goes and asks for a rate increase, LG&E on our radar because of Louisville, right?
Hmm.
MAC needs to be at that table representing those voices and making sure that it is known that low income households are struggling.
Yeah.
The conversation of the day, and I mean, we've had this conversation. KRC has had this conversation on affordability for years, but you could even see it at this last legislative session where affordability was a word that both sides of the aisle were using this year, and they
Hmm.
were contextualizing a lot of their legislation within affordability. Affordability, thinking about gas prices, transportation costs, thinking about how that impacts food costs, medical costs. This all comes together in this affordability conversation. But being able to go to the regulatory body that decides what the future of rates are going to be, we haven't seen a PSC say, "Hey, rates are too high. Let's pull them back."
Yeah.
I would love that. I
Wouldn't
dream
we
of
all?
that, right? But being able to bring the housing perspective in with our joint interveners, the Mountain Association, Kentucky's for the Commonwealth, Kentucky Solar Energy Society, thinking of all these conversations we're having, it has to happen at the PSC.
Yeah.
That body, most people don't know what it is, that it even exists, that you can actually go and get public comment and input on it to the commissioners. They hold public hearings in multiple locations a lot of times. We've seen an uptick of people sending in comments, both virtually and or appearing in person. But you have to be involved. You have
Yeah.
to be able to push a narrative, back it up with the data. That's one thing MHC has always been about in our, KRC and others,
Yeah.
is we have to have good data. Let's back up that narrative we have with the data. If we see holes in that data, we need to ask questions about how we can access that data. So we're constantly trying to figure out how to access new sets of data in order to show that, hey, rates need to be kept as low as possible, and what contributes to that
Yeah.
affordability question. And that all happens at the PSC.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about the PSC to me is, as a regulatory body, they're a little different from the others because they have these commissioners that are sort of like judges, basically, and it's all like a quasi-judicial
Mm-hmm.
format. So aside from being able to give public comments, it's not like the Planning Commission or the Air Pollution Control District or wherever, where they have a hearing and that's it.
Yeah.
There's a whole discovery process and everything where we have the opportunity to try and dig in if we are allowed intervention. So
Mm-hmm.
it's great to be able to represent MHC.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say I think MHC may be the only organization intervening before the PSC that really represents solely the interests of residential, or at least low and fixed income residential ratepayers.
Mm-hmm.
The Attorney General can intervene, but they are statutorily obligated to represent all ratepayers, which of course includes, industrial customers. It includes Walmarts and Krogers and
Yeah.
whoever else as well.
Yeah.
They're trying to keep rates down too, but they're not as focused on like who ends up paying those rates at the end.
Yeah. And it's great because it's funny when you show up as a houser in a world that is not traditionally a housing conversation. I've been attending U.S. Water Alliance meetings at the national level, and like, hey, there are a lot of housing people here all of a sudden. So I think not only a local conversation, but nationally, people are looking at the broad base of utilities and that impact, and how it again ties into the housing affordability question. So it's fun to that intersectionality, right?
Yeah.
Like bringing all these different groups together to have a more complicated conversation, and you make better policy out of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's great. You mentioned earlier the sort of coalition of the joint interveners and getting perspectives from around the state and sort of different types of perspectives as well. So you mentioned Mountain Association, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, Kentucky Solar Energy Society, and Appalachian Citizens Law Center all sort of intervene depending on where the case is and what the focus of the case is. So yeah, it's been great to be able to work, in Kentucky Power territory with Mountain Association and ACLC, and then when LG&E and a KU case comes up, Mountain Association is still concerned because they have, they do small commercial stuff in KU territory in Eastern Kentucky as well, and then we've got the very diverse perspective of MHC representing the sort of different urban take on it, but there's definitely intersectionality there, right?
And I think that's critical too, right? Like I think a lot of times we tend to think about, hey, this is an urban conversation on housing. Well, there's no housing in the rest of the state, right? Yeah, there are different historical reasons of why the housing is needed in different parts of the state, but trying to bridge that urban rural conversation is very important. And this is one of the areas in which I think by building these coalitions, the joint interveners, and whatever that looks like, and what the area we're discussing is so important, right? Is that we have that state reach, we have those differing perspectives, and I love those partnerships, right? Those are some of the best partnerships we have.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, along with that, I promised we returned to Sarah's role at MHC a couple years ago, I guess around the same time that I started at KRC. You guys started up the Every Home program. Tell us a little about that specifically, how that started, the goals, and what y'all are doing there.
Yeah, it all grew out of, so MHC is a team of three, right? Sarah Pierce is the Every Home program coordinator. Elena Lofgren is the assistant director of MHC. And so we're a small team with big reach, much like our friends at KRC and other areas, right? Like it's amazing to see how some nonprofit partners operate at such a state level with big conversations, right?
Or even a metro.
Or even a metro level, right? Like they're like, hey, MHC's everywhere. We are everywhere, right? We have to be everywhere. Or we have housing coalition members that do that. But yeah, we saw the need, and it all goes back to the pandemic, right? Like we've been doing energy work for better part of 2 decades, is my understanding. We brought water into the conversation during the pandemic because, yet again, rental assistance, utility assistance, people were making that connection. And so looking at how, we work with a part of the One Water Coalition with MSD and Louisville Water Company. So
Hmm.
Shannon Tiffett and many partners on both sides there on water affordability issues. And so all these conversations kept coming together and like, hey, okay, the pandemic is over or whatever.
Hmm.
We need to continue this conversation. People have grasped this and understand this. And so we were able to leverage some national funding to be able to create Sarah's position to be able to come in and continue and make a kind of concerted effort, an intentional effort to have a part of our organization to where we could really speak to this in not only the development of data, but also to continually have webinars, table and interact with people. We passed out water kits as a part of this. So every home was created. Every home was intentionally created as every home because we knew it would start out as an energy focus, that we wanted to expand it to water utilities. And it allows, if you think about utilities on the whole, which impact fair market rents. Think about Section 8 vouchers. You think of a lot of this. Utilities are a part of this conversation, and every home allows us to talk energy and water right now. But what if we wanted to talk about, internet access or
Yeah,
whatnot, right? Like every home allows
much
us to
more and
talk about
more.
all that. So it can continue to expand. It's very intentional. It's out there. It's its own brand. And it helps support this work in a way that MHC hasn't done before.
Yeah.
We're getting some good feedback on it. We've built good partnerships based on that as well. So coalition building is the name of the game, and making sure that we are intentional about pushing out that narrative on utility
Yeah.
affordability, and every home is the way in which we do that.
Yeah. I think one term that I don't think I knew specifically before getting into this work, but sort of understood intuitively, and I think everybody probably does, is
Uh-huh.
energy burden.
Uh-huh.
Could you explain sort of what that term means and how it's used as a standard in this world?
Yeah, yeah. So we think of energy burden in housing, where we think of cost burden, right?
Hmm.
Spending more than 30% of your income on housing and utilities. So that's a world that some in the housing world understand, right? But when you think of the energy burden, it's the same thing, spending more of a certain percentage of your income on energy costs. So energy burden is spending more than 6% of your household income. And so we have 57,000 Louisville households who are considered energy burdened. The lowest income households in Louisville, 0 to 30% area median income, is kind of the lowest grouping that we look at in the housing world, have an energy burden of 18% or more. So think 6%, think 18%. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of crazy to think about. Uh, the kind of the major concentration and probably the most impacted or low income households are communities of color in Louisville, are disproportionately affected by energy burden. And again, right, like when we do the same Metropolitan Housing Report, if you overlay these maps year over year, areas of poverty, household incomes, female-headed households with children, where different types of affordable housing are built, you'll see a heat map develop in
Yeah.
certain geographic areas. And so we think about that as, kind of that total impact, right? I always talk about housing as a keynote or the keystone, right? It impacts educational outcomes, economic opportunity outcomes, health outcomes, name it, it's tied to housing. If we stabilize housing, we can stabilize so many other
Yeah.
things. So we focused on that. I mean, even in the water world as well, we you talk about households that are burdened. So almost 18% of Louisville households spend more than 4.5% of their income on water and wastewater as well.
Yeah.
So you got housing cost burden, you have energy, electric,
Yeah.
gas, and you have water as well. And so we could talk about cost burden in any area, and it's going to be a similar group of individuals who are impacted by that.
Yeah, and it's another sort of key area where that data is really important, especially at that granular level, right? Like I remember looking at Kentucky Power Company territory, Eastern Kentucky, and you can look at it by census tract from the Department of Energy's LEAD tool, LEAD, low. oh, I forget
Yeah.
the purpose of the acronym now.
Yeah.
But if you look at it just for people at all incomes, you get one sort of heat map and then you can filter out and just look at, but what's the energy burden for people who are at or below 200% of the area median income? And you
Yeah.
just see it light up. And even within a census tract, you've got sometimes folks who are high income that masks the impact on the lower income folks within that
Yeah,
community, right?
yeah, and that's part of the report we did. A couple of reports that have
Yeah.
been out recently, right, have been talking about that energy burden, that cost burden for households, to try to drive that conversation and develop more of an understanding of that. So
Yeah, you guys put out one last year. You did
we
with the
did
Southern Energy Efficiency Alliance, right?
see it. Yep.
Affordability beyond the rents. If
Mhm.
you haven't seen it, check it out. You can just Google MHC and affordability
Uh-huh.
beyond the rents and find it still, I think.
Mhm.
Tell us a little about that report, how that came about, and what y'all found.
Yeah, so yeah, that resides on the Every Home website, also the MHC website as well. So that grew out of this effort to have a dedicated staff member. Before it was the executive director doing this work as well. So having a capacity building to bring on Sarah to
Yeah.
do that work and focus on that is very important because that also helped drive. It's like, hey, we need to actually write a report that backs up what we're trying to do here, which
Yeah.
is housing and utility affordability. So that's where the report came out. That grew into a conference this past year as well, which was well attended from across the state. Had some really good conversations and side conversations there.
Yeah.
But really, the report itself, Beyond the Rent, really came out with four kind of recommendations coming out of it. Improving housing, energy, and water use, and really having a detailed conversation about that, taking us to kind of the collaborative effort of the approach in Louisville that needs to happen when we talk about this, convening community conversations, bringing coalitions of organizations together to be able to come up with a, combat affordability and kind of a policy priority list as far as that. Streamlining the assistance program as well. Let's do single entry on that. That always helps less complicated process, leading to more access to resources. That was part of it. And, what I was saying, reforming utility policies as well. So equitable utility prices is part of that. Kind of lessening the impact of fixed meter fees. Fixed meter fees are regressive, whether you talk about water, wastewater, energy, whatever. Fixed meter costs are a regressive way to think about rate structures. And then percentage of income payment plans as well, thinking about we have a stratification of households with different incomes. How can we make it achievable for people to actually afford their utilities? And if they get behind, how they can pay their utilities to catch up. So those are all came out of that report. It's a much larger report, but further linking, hey, housing and utility costs are related. So I would, recommend everybody take a look at that.
Yeah, it's another one where it focuses on Louisville, but those recommendations really could apply
Mhm.
statewide or even nationally, I think, in a lot of respects.
Yeah, and we always try to do that, right? Like this is Louisville, this is a microcosm, but let's think about it, how it reflects out and how it's connected to those larger issues in the state, right? Because we have to talk about that. We can't just focus on Louisville itself.
Yeah, one of the other state level things that you mentioned earlier, but applies in Louisville as well, the disconnection protections. That's something we pushed for before the PSC. The basic idea is not necessarily even starting off with utilities aren't allowed to disconnect people at all for non-payment, but it's like during the hottest days and the coldest days of the year, they are prohibited for, a period around that, right? That's the basic idea.
That is, and not shutting people off on a Friday and they can't get it restarted till the following Monday. I mean, the argument's there, right? Talking about some counties are already covered by these protections. We need a legislative fix to this, or a regulatory fix. Somehow, we need to create a fix to this to apply to all 120 counties. And some people don't like this argument. We have to make it though, is that it protects property. It protects landlord properties for renters. But it also protects the property of people who are the renters as well. If you have your energy shut off and all of a sudden your pipes freeze and your property floods, you're losing your property. You don't have a healthy and safe place to live anymore. The landlords have to do something to fix up their property, and you may lose all your important documents
Yeah.
that you need to access resources across the community. So that's the same argument with evictions. When you get a set out on evictions, all your stuff gets moved to the curb. That includes birth
Yeah.
certificates, any kind of critical documents you need for you or your children. And so that's an important part of this conversation. And if we have a legislature that is made up of a lot of landlords and real estate folks, they should understand that.
Yeah. I was just out in Western Kentucky where my wife's from last week and ran into somebody at a store who's that wasn't even related necessarily to freezing pipes, but a
Yeah.
pipe burst, house flooded. Now it's unlivable, mold growing there and everything else. And
Yep.
it ends up costing the landlord a lot more to end up repairing that than it would have in the first place. So it's part of a larger like cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the cost to utilities of not being able to cut people off on the hottest or coldest days versus what is the benefit to society as a whole or even to the utilities? Like they keep a ratepayer paying that way, right? If they're disconnected, not only are they not paying their past due bills, but they're not paying new bills either as they come in, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, the argument is not we're not going to release people from their obligation to pay for the utilities. We're trying to argue for ways and pathways to keep people safe, find a way to get back on track. But they have to be safe and healthy environments for that to happen. And without your utilities, you don't have that kind of healthy environment to exist in, right? So that is critical to think about.
Yeah. One of the other pieces you mentioned as a recommendation there was the single entry for assistance. So there are a number of different utility assistance programs. There's LIHEAP, there's utility specific assistance programs. There are community ministries and others like that that provide direct pay. Talk about how somebody who might be struggling with their bills would go about currently finding the assistance that they need.
Yeah, I mean, MHC's created a resource guide that kind of brings together utility and housing. Sarah was instrumental in putting that together, and we've seen every tabling opportunity or organization we talk to has taken those to hand those out. Or here are your key contacts. LIHEAP assistance continually under threat at the federal level recently. To be defunded, which would be catastrophic across the state, right? I think even when there was talk of defunding, state legislative representatives and senators were talking about, hey, what are we going to do at the state level if this is to go? We're going to have to create some kind of mechanism to help people out. Community ministries are vital partner in this work, who are day to day working with people who are trying to find housing, who are trying to find utility assistance, housing assistance. But many times the money that they're receiving from utilities, from LG&E, from the water companies, that money is gone 5 months into the year. So May, money's gone. What do you do for the next 7 months? So that's just a temporary fix, and it's to who can access the money first. LIHEAP kind of a similar way. That's a system that needs, thinking about. I know early on, a lot of people get in at the front end of when LIHEAP is available. You can't find a time slot to go in and have a meeting and an appointment. That's problematic. Supposedly, from recent conversations later on in that process, some of the appointments free up. But there needs to be more done on the front end for people because they are not expending all their money, and so you have to have that appointment to be able to get access to that.
Yeah, and so the LIHEAP in Louisville, anyway, I think is administered by the Office of Resilience through the city.
Well, yeah, it's now the Office of Social Service, the OSS.
Yeah, and that's different from the community ministries that get some of the utility assistance, and then I think there are other utility programs that you have to like apply through the utility for.
Yeah.
So you have to go at least 3 different places to find those 3 different sources of assistance.
And this is a problem. I mean, it's not only a problem with utility assistance, right? It is a problem with housing too.
Yeah.
We've had, when they were redoing Beecher Terrace, right? There was no single application for people to find additional housing when they were being relocated. So they're driving all over or taking public transportation all over to visit each of these potential apartment complexes or places in which they could live, paying filing fees for each of the applications. So it's expensive. It doesn't work. And so we can create a single source mechanism for both utilities, for housing, for access to programs, and tie all this together. You could even tie utilities and housing together, right? To where people could get the access to the programs that they need the amount of time you spend to research those programs and apply for those programs and go to meetings.
Yeah.
It's not an easy process. People are not being lazy, as you often hear with that. It is complicated, it's time consuming, and you have to be able to get from here to there sometimes to have those conversations.
Especially if you're working or and you have a full-time job as well,
Or two or three.
or
Yeah.
two or three, and children to take care of, and no childcare. Another aspect that I'm sure you guys are concerned about sometimes too.
Yeah, that was also another complicated conversation with childcare and zoning conversation,
Yeah.
right? There were a lot of developments in areas in Louisville that didn't want to allow access to childcare and have childcare, individuals who ran childcare
Yeah.
facilities in their neighborhoods because of ingress and egress of traffic coming into their
Yeah.
neighborhoods, some ridiculous conversations, which should have been an easy conversation to have because I know this from experience. Childcare is a hard thing to get. It's
Yeah.
expensive, and we could use a lot more of it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember from childhood when my mom babysat the couple neighborhood kids. That might be something that some neighborhoods wouldn't even allow now.
Yep.
All right. I do want to make sure we save at least a few minutes for questions and answers, but I wanted to hit on at least two other things really quickly. After that affordability beyond the rents report last year, MHC also collaborated with KRC on another report titled Kentucky's Energy Transition.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about where that? I'm happy to go back and forth on it. I know I got really in the weeds on some of the technical stuff, but where did that come from, and what did we find in that one?
Yet again, thinking about some recent legislation, right, that we were kind of reacting to and needing to think about. Senate Bill 4, Senate Bill 349, which did not do anything to create safer, more stable, affordable housing in our community or utilities in our community, right? And so I think we had a conversation, right? What could we as a coalition, joint interveners, sit down and have a conversation about how we could build a base of policy recommendations, analysis of the impacts of that, and what potential, to create further understanding. Huge effort, right? Like a lot of modeling went into that, a lot of conversations about what the policy recommendations coming out of that. And I think the optimism coming out for me was on the affordability question, right? There are paths to affordable, clean energy in our state.
Yeah,
that's possible.
Yeah. So the underlying bills that you mentioned, Senate Bill 4 in 2023 and 349 in 2024, they sort of created these barriers to retiring fossil fuel units or replacing them with new units that weren't of the same type, basically, right? So we hired Current Energy Group, this international expert group in utility modeling to determine what the impact of that was, right? And model different pathways, sort of what utilities are currently planning based on their current integrated resource plans. We could have a whole conversation about IRP,
right,
CPCNs and everything else, but what their current plans are versus a actual least cost. Just don't constrain the model, let it choose what the least cost resources are. And that's where we found there is a more affordable and cleaner option, right?
Right. It includes a very diverse approach to it, right? Renewable energy, increased DSM, storage, battery storage, like that's what we found out. And I think we all had inklings, right?
Yeah.
But like the data shows this, and it's hard to argue with the data.
Yeah. Anytime you constrain what the options are, it's going to make it more expensive, right?
Yes.
If you don't get to choose whatever the least cost option is. And that was all while, of course, maintaining the same amount of reliability. And you mentioned the least cost portfolio it's not like we're saying shut down all coal plants tomorrow. It's as things age out, the new options tend to be more affordable, are renewable energy. But then, so one model portfolio just chose the cheapest generating resources, right? The renewables and batteries came out on top for most of the new, and wind actually. So solar and wind and batteries. But then we ran another model that let it choose, or CEG ran the modeling. I wouldn't know where to begin with that, but chose another model where instead of just choosing how to generate new power, how we could avoid having to generate that, right? And you mentioned DSM. Could you tell us what that means and the importance of that?
So demand side management,
Yeah,
right? That's a constant conversation with the utilities as
yeah,
well. What kind of programs can we develop? Think of We Care program, right, to where you can have an assessment of your house to come in and be as efficient as possible. To think about peak use, right, as well. How can
yeah,
you kind of gauge what energy you're using and when to use it, and where you might be able to pull back a little bit?
yeah,
There are a lot of different programs offered. There needs to be more. Needs to be more commitment there. And I don't know if I should say this, but like I don't think the utilities understand that if they have a conversation that is informed by good data, yet again, that we can understand the need of the households and we can understand in conversation and help develop programs that meet the need of the community,
yeah.
right? And a lot of times those conversations have not been a two-way conversation.
Yeah, I think what we often say as far as how to meet the need, the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't have to produce in the first place,
Yeah,
right?
right, exactly.
So more efficient housing, that's a concern, I'm sure, in West Louisville, where we have a lot of aging housing,
Yeah.
as it is in Eastern Kentucky, where we have, I think the COO and president of Kentucky Power Company said recently, they're just pouring their heating right into the ground. They may
Yeah.
as well not
Yeah.
even be they may as well be heating the whole earth
Yeah.
with how inefficient some of the homes are,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that I mean that's all a part of this conversation, and we're continually engaged in that conversation, but the conversation needs to be structured in a very different way, where it's a two-way conversation.
Yeah. As you predicted, we're quickly filling up the hour, but I wanted to
We
hit
can talk all day.
yeah. You mentioned demand response, and that ties to the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is something coming up everywhere and worthy of its own session. We did have one on this earlier in the year. Check out the KELI website for a recording specifically about data centers, but this is the big conversation across the state right now, right? You mentioned peak shaving as one option, but
Yeah.
talk a little bit about gosh, so many angles to start with. How is that conversation fitting into the utility piece generally for you guys, and also the zoning piece, tying it back into
Oh
that?
my. Yeah, it is the hot topic across not only Louisville, not all the way across Kentucky, but across the United States and really the
Yeah,
world, to tell the truth. And how do we manage this conversation? From an MHC perspective, thinking about housing, it's an affordability conversation. So if we're at the Public Service Commission and they're approving new infrastructure, who's going to pay for that, right? Residents are going to be on the hook for a lot of this. So we need to think about that. So affordability, it goes into the affordability of housing question. The other thing is a kind of a safety and environmental and health conversation about where these can be built and the impacts on residents who live in and around the areas. That's something that needs to be lifted up. It's being lifted up by a lot of community organizations in Louisville. The No Data Center 502 group. There's several different data center groups who are having a conversation. University of Louisville is having a conversation and bringing in some national speakers
yeah, so
virtually.
one webinar, but they've got a whole series going on right now.
They have a whole series. MHC's looking at a data center kind of webinar as well, or half day virtual conference, thinking about that. So we need to continue to have these conversations and collaborate on these conversations. There are some varying perspectives, but ultimate goals I think are very similar. So we need to be in conversation.
Yeah.
So that kind of that safety aspect of, you think about Campground Road being the big conversation these days. We need to have a conversation on safety and community and where they can be built. And then the zoning conversation.
Yeah.
That is the big one in Louisville. We've been waiting for several months to have an updated zoning ordinance. There's been a couple attempts at a moratorium on zoning data centers or building data centers. We saw that in Oldham County actually go through, and they had a moratorium where they've taken time to think about their policies. That activated a large segment of Oldham County. A large segment of Louisville is being activated now. But we've seen a draft now of what that is. In many ways, that aligns with KRC's.
It covers at least most of the broad topics that we did.
It needs some work on it. MHC is in the final stages of releasing a data center white paper as well. which hopefully in July will be something we release. But I think the community needs to be in conversation with that. That's going to start moving through Planning Commission, through Metro Council, and we'll see where we end up. I mean, there are council members saying they want to listen to community to see where that conversation goes, and the realization that hey, we live in the world that we live in, which is driven by cloud activities. AI is a big question of conversation about how that's going to be integrated, the long-term nature of commitments there. If we build out this infrastructure as well, right? What happens if it doesn't kind of come to fruition?
What if that bubble bursts?
What if the bubble bursts? What if, AI companies are shopping around for the best deal? So if they're not coming, if they're talking to Kentucky, but end up not coming here, we have a lot of waterways in which they would like access to water. We need to have conversations on both energy and water costs.
Yeah.
So,
well, we've got just a few minutes left. I did want to turn to questions. I don't know if there are any in the chat yet. Before we do that, or while folks think about their questions, I did want to make sure folks know, keep an eye out for that white paper from MHC. Find their page and make sure that you subscribe. Same with KRC. We have a data center page, but check out our website in general. I think yours is metrohousing.org or
metropolitanhousing.org.
Metropolitanhousing.org. And then kyrc.org. We are also both member-supported organizations, so feel free to support the work that both of our organizations are doing. I think that Ashley has links that she'll be posting in the chat as well for folks who have the ability to support us. But with that, Ashley, do we have questions in the chat or hands raised?
Sarah, do you want to go?
Yeah, I had a question,
or
something that I'd like to hear more about. But something that a lot of low income LG&E ratepayers are also facing right now is having to go to third party locations to pay their bill. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the office closures and how that affects people's bills.
That's a great question. Thank you, Sarah. Good to see you. I'm kind of in here on vacation time, so hadn't seen Sarah for a week. Yeah, that's a big question. LGD, KU closed business offices across the state. They said it was because, well, for multiple reasons, lack of use. People weren't coming in to pay their bills anymore. But when you use third-party sites, there's a cost. If you're paying cash, if you're paying check, whatever, you're paying fees. So this, I think, in our opinion, is kind of a de facto rate increase for people in the lowest of incomes who are going, I went with my grandmother to the local grocery store to pay our utility bills growing up. I remember that, and I didn't know if there was a fee at that point. I didn't pay attention, right? I was pretty young. But if we are charging one, two, I don't care what the amount is, it's an increase. And people on low incomes, if it's $1, $2, and we're seeing, I think we saw what in our data requests, the number of households who
we did. I don't remember the numbers,
but if it's, what does that cost to LG&E? They say it's tied to the vendors, right?
Yeah.
It's the vendor they're working with who's getting the money. LG&E is not doing this, but they're also saving millions of dollars on not running those business offices.
Yeah. I think it's one of the places though where advocacy actually does work. The issue is still out there. I think it's still tough for folks sometimes to make it to the right place. And the offices serve other purposes, filing complaints, disputing bills, finding assistance, and things like that you can't go to Walmart or Kroger or wherever and do. But I will say, because I think of advocacy from folks like MHC and the Association of Community Ministries in their latest rate case that was just approved earlier this year, they did finally agree, starting in, I think, February or March, to start covering that, I think, $2 or so fee at least. So that's one aspect that
forward-looking, not looking back. Right?
Not looking back. If you paid before that rate went into effect, you're still out of luck.
Yep.
And they were saving, I think, $7 million or something like that per year by closing that off.
Yeah, and I think, like you were saying, right? Like if you have to go to a third-party site to pay your bill, you have a problem. Then you have to try to connect with customer service and align your time at the office or the third-party site. So it doesn't make sense to me from a customer perspective. That is the most effective way to do that.
Yeah.
There's another, I know we
Other,
read it one, but there's another good question in the chat. Just if, Tony, if you have thoughts on the federal legislation that was passed by Congress, which Trump is refusing to sign. And I know there's a lot baked into that law. Maybe arguably some good, some bad, but if you just have some overall thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm still processing that as well. It's a pretty big bill. It's been worked on for several years now. It passed with supermajorities in both the House and the Senate. So there's no chance that even if a veto were issued, that it would not pass through. It's about housing access. It's a housing supply, a series of things that would affect housing supply, and therefore they're arguing affordability. It prevents private equity from buying up X number of single family homes as an investment, which is a conversation we've had locally, and I don't know the fix to that. So maybe this is offering us a fix there. Yeah, the president has 10 days excluding Sundays, to actually sign it or not. If not, it becomes law as long as they're in session. So it's rare that you see a piece of legislation of this magnitude with so many working parts on housing. Again, affordability conversation is big in the country, and I think this is a result of that. So I think we're still processing all the little pieces of that, and we'll look to some of our close partners, the National Low Income Housing Coalition and others, to think about the impacts. There's also some stuff on environmental NEPA reviews and whatnot in it, which I haven't looked in great detail at yet, so I'd be interested to hear from KRC about that.
whole other conversation.
Whole other conversation.
The state
right?
of NEPA is, yeah.
So we all need to review that, I think
Yeah,
is what I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
Any others? I know we're past time. I've still got a couple minutes.
I think just in terms of legislative efforts, where we think we're headed, next year, both on the housing side and, repeal of, SB 89 and 349. But, and again, I think we could have a whole Zoom on that, but maybe just some last parting comments on thinking about, headed into the next legislative session and things that we can be doing in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it's a big question, right? You get done with one legislative session, you're already thinking about the next one.
At least it's a short one next year.
At least it's a short one, but it's not a budget year. I'm hoping we see some movement on disconnections and shutoffs. It's a no-brainer. It's a no-cost thing. It protects Kentuckians and all the constituents of all the senators and representatives. That's going to be a big one to push, and how we get it through. The strategy behind that is something I think we're discussing. I think an eviction expungement is another big thing that hopefully in the next year to 2 years we'll see get through. That's been a multi-year campaign. There was a lot of talk coming out of the interim conversations of the Housing Task Force about creating these revolving loan funds that other very similarly positioned political their states with similar political landscapes, Oklahoma, Montana, and others. Wendy Smith does a great job of talking about this and did it at the task force, that all these very similar states are passing hundreds of millions of dollars in revolving loan funds for housing. We need to do the same thing in here, but we're keeping it in our rainy day fund because we want to pull back on state income taxes and then sales and use taxes increase. So that is a critical piece of this puzzle. We have to have the funding mechanisms and the tools and the resources to be able to combat this housing crisis. So I think there's agreement that there needs to be. I think where the disagreement is the amount of money. There was one proposed last year for $100 million. We'll see if that gets proposed again. I'm sure it will be in some form. So that'll be another issue. I think it'll be interesting to watch the data center conversation at the state legislative. There was some last year, but we'll get more focus since it's not a budget session moving up. So that's always the question of a non-budget cycle. So there will continue to be a lot of housing modernization of the state affordable housing trust fund was another thing to increase the deed fee by $24. There was pushback from clerks and from the real estate community on that. I don't think $24 is going to break the real estate deal that's going to happen. It might have some impact, but in most cases, it hasn't been updated in several decades. So in order to have a funding mechanism and a dedicated source, we need to do that to be able to build more housing. So it's about tools and resources as much as anything.
Affordability.
Yes.
All right. Maybe we'll leave it with that message then. Thank you all so much for attending. We really appreciate the chance to talk with folks, and we'll see you hopefully in July and definitely in August for the rest of our KELI summer series. Any last words, Ashley?
Just thanks to everybody for being here.
Thank you all.
Thanks for the
Thanks to
opportunity.
Tony for joining us today with the KELI session.
Yes, thank you, Tony.
That's great.
Great
I got to
conversation.
say, one of our closest partnerships is with the Kentucky Resources Council, and our partnerships on the work we do. It's always a joy to be involved with you
Yeah.
guys. And anytime we can get together and
Both
talk about
ways.
this, I love it. So
Yeah, awesome. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good one.
Bye.